Hey everybody, welcome to Forbes, the CEO's Guide to Marketing. I am your host, Seth Matlins, and with me today is Kofi Amoo-Gottfried, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of DoorDash. Welcome, Kofi.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here, man. All right, I'm going to do the reading of your bio here. So I have taken the liberty of making some edits, but very few, because as I was saying to you off camera, it's delightfully short. Kofi Amoo-Gottfried is the CMO at DoorDash, where, amongst other things, he's responsible for driving growth and engagement across all three sides of the company's marketplace: consumers, merchants, and dashers. Kofi leads a global multidisciplinary team of marketing strategists, which we're going to talk about, growth marketers, data analysts, content marketers, and spearheads the company's marketing initiatives in order to foster and build a brand that remains culturally resonant at every touch point. Among so many other accolades, in 2024, Kofi was named to both the Forbes Entrepreneurial CMO 50 list, or was that 23?
I don't remember.
Well, that's the way it goes when you got a lot of accolades, as well as the Forbes World's Most Influential CMOs list. And before joining DoorDash just over 5 years ago, he was VP of Brand and Consumer Marketing at Meta. He served as Meta's head of consumer marketing for Internet.org, and he spent years as a strategist on the agency side at Publicist. Leo Burnett, whose name was officially retired today. I think you saw that.
I did see that this morning.
R.I.P. And Weiden and Kennedy, just, absolute all legends of our business. Kofi, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
All right, man. As I think you know, we start all of our episodes with some rapid fire questions. So let's just get into it. First one is marketing is.
Marketing is a growth engine fueled by empathy, math, and magic.
I like both the end and the means in your definition.
Absolutely.
A brand is?
A brand is, so I feel really strongly about this one.
I know you do.
It's the sum of all interactions and associations that people have with a product or service. So brand is everything, and everything is brand.
Yeah, you shared that definition more or less on, I think it was on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and I've cut and pasted it because I thought it was both as expansive and as specific and correct a definition as I've heard. And we're going to talk a lot about that. All right. From your perspective, not thinking just about your job, but the job, the hardest part of being a CMO is what?
Being able to evolve at the pace of culture and technology and consumer society.
It's interesting. We talked to Andrea Brimmer a week ago, and she said exactly the same thing.
It's impossible.
It's impossible to keep up with it. And in fact, somebody, I think I referred to this on a previous episode, though can't be sure because I don't listen to me. Thank you to the audience for listening to me, at least for the moment. But one of your old colleagues' bosses, Antonio Lucio, said something to me about 2 years ago, which is today's CMO has to be the CEO of the function because it's so impossible to keep up or to have expertise, let alone 100%. Keep up with everything. If that's the hardest part of being a chief marketing officer, what back to your use of the word empathy, thinking empathetically and practically, what's the hardest part of being a CEO today?
Well, I think it's related, but it's also being responsible for everything that happens in the organization, right? So, and being accountable for all of it. So when I think about a business like DoorDash, complex, multi-sided marketplace, to have its CEO like Tony Xu, who has to be able to understand everything about this deeply complex business on a daily basis and be able to make decisions about every part of that system is intimidating.
Well, and or defer to the decisions that you make and others within the C-suite. Why do you think, at the risk of digression, there is, again, not within DoorDash, but broadly, why do you think there's a propensity, there's a common question across all of these episodes for so many CEOs not, in fact, to defer to the decisions their chief marketing officers make, and CFOs too, for that matter?
Yeah, I think part of this might be wired in the cultural sort of fabric of the organization. So I think most leaders generally think their job is to make all of the decisions. And I think if you're in a business where the leader sees their role in that way, and particularly for functions that they understand less well, there's an incentive for them to put their thumb on the scale, right? So there's a counterintuitive thing where I would expect that, like, for functions that let's say your CEO came out of a finance background. They would want to be heavily invested in
as
finance,
most
as
do.
many of them do.
I shouldn't say most. Many is more accurate. Finance or operations.
Yeah, finance or ops. But I think you tend to find that on the less well understood functions, because the CEO has more anxiety about not understanding the function, they're much more likely to weigh in.
That's really interesting. Yeah, to control what they can.
Correct.
Or to seek control of that which they can. Why do you think so? So if and the data is quite clear, right? 90% of the CEOs of the world's largest companies have zero marketing experience or background.
Right.
If marketing's job is to drive growth, why do so few chief executives come from marketing, given that their job is to drive growth?
Yeah, I think it's probably a function of skill sets and sort of what the market values, right? So when I think about how boards think about companies, it's through the lens of shareholder value. Right. So a board's job is like, how do I grow the value of this company? And that's a deeply numerical exercise. And so I think there's a bias.
Is it a numerical exercise or a numerical measurement?
Because it's a numerical measurement. Yeah. It's the right way to frame it.
Right. But isn't the CMO's job as well to figure out how they grow the value, stakeholder, shareholder value?
Without question. But I think most boards, when they're thinking of the metric, the bias is to go to the people that have run ops, that have run finance, that have been accountable for the full P&L of an entire business.
Right.
Versus the marketing function that has a P&L within it, but it's not the same as managing the P&L of a business line, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And while it's not on my list of questions, you bring it up and it reminds me, which is one of the, I see a lot of spec sheets in my job at Forbes for CMO roles. Right. I have rarely seen one that has P&L responsibility. Right. If a marketer's job is to drive growth, and of course everybody's job is to contribute to the driving of growth, why do so few CMOs have P&L responsibility, let alone sight of line into the company's P&L? How do I drive growth if I don't understand how growth is driven?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I will say that I'm in the privileged position where I do not have that problem, because the way we think about our business is that our job as marketing is to contribute to growth. Yeah. And so we have very specific goals within marketing that ladder up into every business line's P&L. So if I look at a business line's sort of waterfall chart of how they're going to grow the business year over year, marketing owns a piece of that growth.
Can you give us just a really practical, tactical example of what that looks like without getting into?
Sure. So, I'll do the most basic version of it. But when we think about the number of orders that we expect to generate in this quarter, and that's owned by a GM on, let's say, the restaurant business. And so he has a volume goal, which is I'm going to generate 1 million orders for the sake of this conversation. In that goal, that goal will be broken down by where is that growth going to come from. And so in that waterfall chart, one of the things will be marketing. That says marketing is going to contribute, let's say, 250,000 of these orders.
What else contributes to it?
There will be things like, yeah, sure. There'll be some things that are organic growth that are baked into the forecast, so current course and speed. But then there'll be other things that we're doing that might be a product change. Right. There might be we are bringing on a new restaurant onto the platform, and that's going to grow. That's going to drive growth. So there'll be things that are not marketing specific, and then there'll be things that are marketing specific.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about marketing specific and marketing adjacent.
Correct.
In a little bit. But getting back to kind of the core questions, which I'm really terrible at sticking to, as our listeners know, what do you see as the biggest tensions between a CMO and their C-suite colleagues, speaking broadly and generally?
Yeah, I think the biggest tension is that if you're in a situation where marketing isn't able to demonstrate its value or prove its value to the business, then you're sort of in this, you can be in this seat where your job is poorly defined in terms of the impact that you drive. So people understand broadly what marketing is, in the sense that, like, hey, we're going to, in the simplest terms, because this is not what marketing is, but in the eyes of other C-suite executives, we're going to put out some campaigns out into the world that say X, Y, Z thing about the business. Right. If that's how your job is defined, then there will always be a tension, because it's not clear what that is driving for the business.
Whose responsibility do you think that ultimately is? I put a lot of that on the CMO themselves.
It has to be.
Yeah.
You have to be able to demonstrate that value. You have to have a clear framework. And this is different for each business, right? I think a lot of times when we have this conversation, people are thinking about sort of the cash register, so like the amount of sales, but there's other value that might be intangible.
Right.
There's value in changing a perception of the business. There's value in growing trust. But whatever it is that you're signing up for, you have to be very clear on what that thing is. You have to have clear alignment around the C-suite that that thing is valuable to the business. And then you have to show over time that you're making progress against that goal.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about how you measure for that as we get into it. But if you could, between now and then, if you could wave a magic wand and address one C-suite misconception about both marketing and marketers, what would it be?
I would say there's probably two things. One we started to chat about a little bit. The first would be that like brand is not marketing's job. Brand is everyone's job inside the company. You and I were chatting about this before we got on. So, you know, if the marketing team is out here talking about DoorDash being the most reliable service, and we'll have you every time something goes wrong, and you have an order that goes wrong and you call customer support and you don't get the help that you need, guess what? That's a brand impression, and it's a super negative one. Yeah. And we see that leads to churn, that leads to a degradation and retention. All of these are brand impressions. So I think one of the most important things that I would want CEOs and C-suites to think about is like, what is the collective responsibility we have as a business to build this brand? And what are all the sets of decisions that we must make across the entire system to build the brand that we want to be true? And then the second one I would say is thinking of thinking of marketing not as as just an output, because in a lot of ways, marketing teams are the ones that are closest to the customer, but thinking of marketing really as an input into shaping the business strategy and the product strategy and the innovation strategy, because in a lot of ways, the marketing team tends to be closest to like where consumers are and what they need next.
I want to come right back to that, but just to finish the questions, brands and businesses grow when?
Oh, that's a good one. Brands and businesses grow when they create value for customers and they solve problems for people.
Do you think that our focus on solving problems sometimes mitigates the inclination to look for creating opportunities?
I think you can do both. And I think you should. And I would say that I actually find that sometimes we're not even solving problems. Yeah. So like creating opportunity is fantastic, sure. But I find that there's a lot of marketing that is like a solution looking for a problem. Yes.
All right. That actually brings me back to where I wanted to go, which, and you were just talking about it, the difference between being an output and an input. Where I want to start kind of the broader conversation is your time, and that time isn't over just because you have a CMO's title, but your time as a strategist. I tend to think that even within marketing land broadly, if you're not inside an agency or haven't grown up in and around that, you may not understand the real important function of a strategist. And I'm wondering if you can share for our audience kind of how what a strategist is and does, how that both differs to and connects with enterprise strategy. And then I'll follow up with a couple of things.
I mean, this is a big question, Seth. Let's see. So the way I guess I think about it is, in the simplest way, strategies for me is like a from-to exercise.
Exactly.
So it's being really clear about where you are today, being really clear about where it is that you want to go, and then being clear about the steps between here and there and what will get you from where you are today to where you want to go.
Can I tell you, my first exposure to a strategist was 3 years into my job, my career. And I was launching a new brand of bottled water in the United States inside of the Avion company. And we were the first client of Merkley Newman Hardy. And the Newman in Merkley Newman Hardy was Jane Newman, who is oftentimes considered the godmother of strategy and planning in the United States. And there's one chart she put up for me, because I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about, or even thinking. That was, you got if you can imagine your typical PowerPoint slide, you got a box on, a square on the left side of the page, a square on the right side of the page. Left side of the page, it says where we are. Left side of the page, it says where we're going. In between was the staircase. It said how we're going to get there.
That was it. That's it. For me, that's always been the best definition of what really good strategy is. And it's one of these things that is simple to explain. It's actually hard to do really well.
So hard to do. What gets in the way of it being simple to do?
One, I think you have to be super clear-eyed about where you are. Many people are not. There's lots of things that gets in the way of you being realistic and true, and truth-seeking about where the business or the brand is today.
Do you think that winds up showing up as solving for symptoms rather than problems?
Yeah, I think it does a couple of things. It solves for symptoms rather than problems, but also doesn't grapple with what the actual problem is.
Yeah.
So if you're not dealing with the real thing, so, for example, you'll know this, you'll see a lot of briefs as a marketing strategist that are about, I want to grow awareness of X thing. To which my answer is like, I'm aware of a lot of things I do fuck all about.
Yeah.
So that's not like
what's the efficacy of the objective?
Matter. Yeah. And what does that matter to the consumer? Awareness is a business problem. It's not a consumer problem. It's your problem that you don't have awareness. But it does nothing for me. It solves nothing for me. It creates no opportunity for me. So being able to get really crisp about like, where is the business today? How does that relate to where the customer is? And then how do you build the path to where you're trying to go? And so I think there's a block first in that first stage of like diagnosing the problem. There's that famous like Einstein quote. It was like, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes figuring out what the problem
question.
is. Yeah. I think we're wrong a lot of times on what the question is. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think even if you get the question right, the path from here to there usually requires like a bunch of really hard choices that, again, not everyone is willing to make. Because I think true marketing strategy or business strategy or enterprise strategy is not about marketing.
Go on.
Usually it has to do with other things that need to be true inside the business, right? So when we think about things like, at DoorDash, one of the things we focus on is like, how do we drive more affordability for our customer?
I would appreciate that.
Correct. But you have to actually do that. I cannot just tell you that this is a more affordable service. There's no marketing answer.
Yeah.
In terms of a campaign to that. I have to change something fundamental about the product. I have to go build Dash Pass as a subscription product that saves you money. I have to build a promo engine that gives you offers when I think you need them. I have to do a bunch of things that are changing the actual nature of the product.
And how from your perspective, and let's not make it about DoorDash, but using those use cases, those need states as reference, how do you think marketing should connect into solving for those problems? And where do you think marketing should not, broadly?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think ideally what I would love to see marketing do is to be able to be the voice of the customer into the organization, to be the people that say, look, here's what we understand what's going on with the world. Here's what we understand about where customers are. Here's what we understand about what they need today. Now, some of those things may be things we have already, in which case, fantastic. Then our job is just to like tell customers we have that thing. So if you didn't know that I have groceries and you need groceries, I should probably just tell you that. But there are things that people might need that we have not yet built. Mm-hmm. In which case, then our job is to go advocate inside the business. So I don't sit inside a CPG company, so I don't control the full stack of the product. So then my job is to say, hey, here's this really interesting insight we found. Product teams, ops teams, how might we build something around this insight that solves this customer need? Because we think there's a massive growth opportunity if we can do that.
I don't know how many clients you must have worked with in your time on the agency side. Dozens, if not hundreds. Do you think most organizations, and let's go client-side organizations at this point, are designed to accept, or both designed and understand how to accept that input from their marketing organization? Because I don't think they are.
No, I don't think that they are, but I think that is, I tend to take this position that like it's the job of the person doing the convincing to be a good convincer.
Yes.
So like sometimes you'll win and sometimes you won't, but like it's your job to pound the table and make the case for why that is the right investment. Right. Or to go off and run some sort of experiment that gives us some signal that says, actually, if we did invest product resources behind this, if we did build a product, it would deliver. Like bring something back to the business that helps the business understand the value of what you're proposing. And every business has different currency. I work in a business where the currency is going to be like, we need data, so go run an experiment. Mm-hmm. Show me that there's a there there. And if there's a there there, then people are going to be willing to listen. and sometimes you're lucky to be in a business where the strength of your convictions is enough. But a lot of times you need to do more than that.
So I want to talk about data based on, riffing off of what you just said, which is data can sometimes tell us there's a there, and the data is wrong.
Correct.
Is there a moment when either the data was wrong and you're like, fuck, we listened to the wrong thing, or the data told us the wrong thing, or where in fact your gut was such that you're like, I don't care what the data says. I know there's I know there's opportunity here. And any story you can share?
So I'll give you an example of places where we don't have good data. So when we're thinking about things like sports partnerships, which you do a fair amount of at DoorDash, those are going to be by definition very hard to measure, right? So like our partnership with the NBA, hard to measure. Like, what's the value of that in the way that I can with a Facebook ad or a Google search or whatever it is. So I think when we first pitched that to the business, the understanding was to say, look, we will not have high measurement fidelity on this out of the gate, but we have a lot of conviction and a lot of other third-party data that tells us that these behaviors are like correlated.
Right.
We understand that sports, and we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, and people can think about their own lives. If you're going to sit on the couch all Sunday afternoon and watch football, being able to order things to your home would deliver value to you. When we think about things like gamers and how endemic delivery is to them, we don't have like data on that out of the gate, but that's a pretty good case that we can make.
So if unpacking what you said, what I hear is you look for those opportunities where the need state is tangible, and measurable. Yeah.
And then you can sell the business in that and say, hey, we will invest here to
just
understand.
Contextually,
it makes sense.
Yeah.
So we don't have the data yet to prove that this is going to pay out as an investment, but we feel very confident based on what we understand about the need states that there's a there. And so we will invest in the absence of having.
So let me ask you a question, because obviously that contextual need state isn't unique to your business,
Correct.
Right? It's specific to a competitive set, a category, or multiple categories.
That's correct.
So if we use the Super Bowl, and we'll think about Super Bowl last year as reference. I think your two closest competitors, at least as I would define it as a consumer, Instacart and Uber Eats, both advertised, as did you, inside the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So if everybody's identifying, if the category is using the same moment of context and need state, how do you differentiate? How do you stand out? Like, how do you get to a place where, you're going to be standing, a minute apart or 15 minutes apart, and drive the business value that you are held to account to for spending $7 million for 30 seconds or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually think this is true not just in Super Bowl. I think this is true all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, right, if you think about most categories, you're talking about multiple brands competing in the same arenas for the same types of customers around the same need states. So we happen to operate in a highly competitive category. And so that's not going anywhere, whether it's Super Bowl or Valentine's Day or frankly just today. Later tonight in New York City to get dinner. And so I think there's a number of things. If you take the moment itself of Super Bowl or any consumer moment, I think the key thing you're looking for there is creativity and breakthrough, because you're going to be up against other people that are competing in your category. And I think you have a couple of choices. So one is you can compete on the message. Is your message going to be different? But you don't control that. You don't know what the other person's going to say. So sometimes you might go into the Super Bowl where you're pushing a totally different angle than they are, and that's fantastic because then you're automatically differentiated. But other times you might both be coming in and saying, we sell a fizzy drink. So if we both sell a fizzy drink, then the job there is that, like, how can I be more compelling in that moment about the thing that I am trying to deliver? For us last year, we wanted to really communicate that DoorDash delivers everything, and we came up with this concept that we're really proud of, which was, how do we partner with every brand in the Super Bowl to deliver everything from the Super Bowl to one viewer? And it was more than the spot, right? The spot.
Well, the spot was the expression of an idea, of an insight.
Correct.
It worked?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would think that the measurement of its working was both relatively fast and relatively easy to see.
Yes. So we try to do two things you and I were chatting about this a little bit before, this notion of the long and the short. And we try to not trade off.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but for those less familiar than Kofi and I are in talking about the long and the short, we're referring to the study and booklet by The Long and the Short of It by Les Binet and Peter Field.
Yeah, and we try to not trade off.
I'll drop that in the show notes, by the way.
Yes, please. It's a great paper. We try to not trade off between those things. We try to build things that will have an immediate short-term impact. Because the best way for us to understand, particularly today in a digitally connected world, the best way for us to understand if our work is resonating is if people are engaging with it in some way.
Yeah.
Now, that may not mean that we're going to see sales on the day that the thing launches, but we launched that thing and we saw 8 million entries. That tells us that people are engaging with this.
Yeah.
Immediately.
I mean, I don't want to throw off your numbers, but I was 6 million of those because
there you go. You did over and over and over again. I want to win all the things. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But like we saw that level of it. So you have like immediate engagement. And even before the entries, in all the work we had done leading up to the game, we saw a ton of engagement all across social. So we're always looking for like in the short, are we seeing people engage with what we're creating? And then over the long term, we would think about, the entire purpose of that campaign and really all of last year was like, how do we get people to think of DoorDash
differently
as more than just restaurants and to use DoorDash recently? And then we get to the end of last year and we go, highest ever level of people transacting in non-restaurant categories. So like, fantastic. We know that we have opened the aperture about how people use the product.
In a inputs and outcomes construct, what do you all see as the value and measure, and how do you measure different types of engagement, right? Too often we see too many marketers thinking engagement is a like on an Instagram post, which has not necessarily any efficacy to the bottom line. How are you looking at it?
Yeah, so we tend to actually look at like short term, not on the daily basis, because it's not doesn't work like that for us. But we will tend to look at like, is this driving actual business impact within the quarter, right? So the activities that we do, whatever they are going to be gold against how many orders did we drive this quarter? How many DashPass subscribers did we get to sign on? How many orders that were non-restaurant orders did we drive? So we're looking at all of those types of metrics over the course of a quarter. And that's what we're ultimately gold on. Now, there'll be other inputs to that, like, hey, this competition drove 8 million entries. It drove 12 billion impressions. It drove a ton of social engagements. All of those tell us, but that's not ultimately like what my bosses are going to ask me about.
Okay, so measuring those things makes sense. What are you doing to find the attribution, right? To what to attribute those measurements?
Yeah, so we do a number of different things. So I'd say
are you guys KPI based or OKR?
We're OKR.
Yeah.
We are, DoorDash's superpower is that we execute better than any organization I've been in. And that's driven by having a culture that's like goals, accountability, and ownership.
Yeah.
Right? So everyone has a goal and everyone has the autonomy to go figure out how to hit that goal, and they'll be held accountable to hitting that goal.
I'll also drop into the notes a book I read over the holiday that is really the book on OKRs, John Doerr's book.
Fantastic book.
Measuring What Matters, I think. It's some version of that.
Measure What Matters.
Yeah, Measure What Matters. So I'll drop a link to that in the notes.
And so we're a very OKR-driven organization. So every quarter we will have a set of goals that marketing has to go hit. But then we have the freedom within that. We have a budget, we have goals, and we have constraints. And within that envelope, we can then figure out how we're going to deploy the money to do that. So we would have had a goal, for example, at the end of Q1 last year that said we want X amount of people transacting in new verticals. We decided as a marketing organization that the Super Bowl was one way amongst many other things we did in that quarter to go hit that goal.
And so many CMOs do not have the permission internally to pull the levers that they think are most valuable. There's data, I think it's out of McKinsey. If I can find it, I'll link to that too in the notes, that shows that, some absurd percentage of organizations and marketing organizations within enterprise find that they are not given the resources to deliver against agreed upon strategies, which is kind of like punching yourself in the face.
Correct.
Why do you think that is?
I mean,
Let me ask a different question because, who the fuck knows, right?
It seems counterintuitive to me.
What would you say to a CFO, let alone a CEO, about understanding or deferring to the expertise of the chief marketer whom they've hired?
Correct.
To pull those levers in order to drive enterprise value and growth?
Yeah, I think the thing that we have found works, and I think is true actually in any company that does this well, is if you have clear goals and you have clear accountability, then that is the framework within which people should be able to operate. Yes. Now, what that means is that, like, for me as the chief marketer, I don't get to say, well, it didn't rain this week, and then that thing happened over there, and, we weren't able to ship that thing in time, and we thought we would sign that merchant and they didn't sign. Like, none of those things matters. Like that scene from the mob movie where it's like, fuck you, pay me. Like, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, right? You have to own it. And so I think having that ownership and accountability and having a culture that enables that is what makes it work.
Right, but there is something in the examples that you're not able to point to that speaks to kind of a prevalent macro condition, which is so much, at least from my perspective, tell me what you think, so much marketing is outside of the marketer's control if you bring to marketing a definition that says, back to your definition of brand, it is the sum of the parts. It's
100%.
The sum total of your experience with, and that includes what your customer service team is doing in the moment of customer engagement. And it includes as well what your HR assistant may be saying to her neighbor.
Totally.
How do you deal with so much out of your control? Is it the difference between control and influence?
100%. So I think there's some set of things that are directly in our control, and I'll separate brand out from marketing impact. Brand is absolutely not directly in my control.
Correct.
Because it's everything.
Yeah.
Marketing impact, directly in my control. Like, we can say, if you give me $100 and it should deliver 20 new customers, assuming that you believe attribution, which we can get into, we can prove that we were able to do that in the court. Like, that is in my control.
But not just understanding, agreeing with you. Brand isn't in your control. Marketing is. But that seems to be creating a divide, not a divide, but a tension between brand's role in marketing.
No, not necessarily. And this is where influence comes in.
Okay.
So I think there's two things. One is, do we have a clear understanding? I think it's marketing's job to define what the brand is.
Right.
So do we have a clear positioning?
Right.
Of what do we want DoorDash to be in the world? What role do we want DoorDash to occupy? How do we want DoorDash to show up, or insert whatever brand that is? Once that is defined and agreed on, how do we then influence the organization? And there'll be all sorts of things. So, like, going back to our customer support, let's say we think that, like, hey, DoorDash is, the way we define it is that, like, we want to be the antidote to the complexity of the modern world, right? That's how we think about our brand. Like, there's a lot, life is hard, it's complex, there's lots of stuff going on. We can be here to be like a 24/7 assistant, whether you're someone who's looking to earn, whether you're someone who's starting a business, whether you're someone who just needs something delivered to you. But that has to be true at every point. So if someone comes to...
Can I interrupt and ask a question? What I hear in that is the opportunity for lines of business you're not in today, right? There's extraordinary elasticity.
Massive.
In that.
Massive.
I'll circle back. Okay. I'm sorry. I interrupted.
No, not at all. But then what that means is, like, if someone shows up to our customer support, we have to lean in with that same mentality.
Right. Right.
So then it's our job to say, I don't control customer support, doesn't report to me. I don't control the product teams, or insert any team here that's outside of marketing. But my team's job is to influence those teams.
Right.
And to bring those teams along on that journey and work with those teams to say, if this is our brand, let's have a conversation about, like, how should that interaction feel?
Why? Well, I've talked about this on a few previous episodes, a couple of them anyway, which is the customer service is a moment when you absolutely, in a battle for attention, in the moment of engagement with customer service, you have full attention.
100%.
Why do you think so many customer service orgs sit outside marketing's control, not just influence?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's because intrinsically, the things that customer support, the way that those teams are built and what they optimize for, and the skill sets for that are not necessarily the ones that like marketers grow up with. Now you can say like that doesn't matter, and you could obviously have going back to Antonio's quote that you shared earlier, which is like you're going to be the CEO of a function. So, if you have another function that's not something you've directly learned, you should be able to manage it.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite specific. Like when I think about DoorDash's customer support, it's massive, it's scaled. That's not necessarily expertise that I have. Right. So I think like finding people that are good at each of these things is what businesses are trying to solve for. Like, how do I build a world-class support function? I would be crazy to tell you that I'm the person to hire to build a world-class support function. I would not be.
Yes.
And so I think that's why you end up with it sitting outside of the market.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. And yet I think my push on that, agreeing with it, my push would still be, sure, you shouldn't be the one to hire for to find the right person to run it, but you shouldn't be divorced. And I guess you're not, right?
We're not.
Yeah.
We're absolutely not.
Right.
We're absolutely not.
And yet I think many organizations, they are.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time, and I want to ask you about your three-sided marketplace and to use it as kind of illustration for a lot of what we're seeing in business today, which is, you reference kind of a CPG past, right? B2C used to be distinct. Now there's so many B2C companies that are B2B.
100%.
B2B to C and vice versa. Well, actually, every B2B company is a B2C company because the business is run by an individual. How do you look at kind of how do you see the interrelationship? Was that a word? Did I make that up?
Yeah, we'll take it.
Whatever. Everybody knows where I'm going. Of the three sides of that marketplace, and how do you figure out where to focus? Because you can't focus on everything.
Yep. So I think there's two things. One, to say if you buy that the premise we talked about earlier, which is ultimately businesses are going to win if they create value and solve problems and find opportunities for people, then in our marketplace, the things that these audiences come to us for are actually quite different, right? So consumers come to us for convenience. That's why they're coming to us. So when you pick up your phone, you need to know that when I order this thing from DoorDash, it's going to show up and it's going to make my life more convenient, not less. So that's one job. Dashers come to us because they're looking for the ability to earn on their own schedule.
Right.
Businesses come to us because they're looking for growth.
Right.
Like, how do I reach a customer that I could not have reached by myself?
Right.
How do I take my business online when it's just a sort of physical, real world business? And so what's interesting...
And sometimes with the rise of ghost kitchens, not even that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about that is you actually have these audiences that are all coming to us for very different things, which means that we actually need to build our team in a way to respond to their needs, right? So I can't, while the DoorDash brand is one brand, what it does for people is actually very different. So when you go back to the definition being expansive, it's deliberately expansive.
Yeah.
When we say we want to be a 24/7 assistant, that's true whether you're a business, whether you're a consumer, or whether you're a dasher. We want to be able to be on demand to help you with whatever it is that you need. So that part has to be true. But the way we show up for each of these audiences has to be different because they're looking for different things. Like my advertising to dashers is about, are you looking for part-time work? Are you looking for
the different need state, different wants?
For a consumer, are you looking for, we did a bunch of stuff over the holidays that was super fun, which is you're trying to live in this moment of owning the last minute gifting use case. Because it turns out a lot of people actually, yours truly included, don't do their Christmas shopping until the week before Christmas. DoorDash is really good at that. So how do we help you do that?
I did mine on Christmas Eve.
Well done.
Not terribly, if I'm honest.
If you're going to do that, you got to be really good at it. You got to be really good at it.
There are a number of IOUs and a lot of cash.
But I think the job is you have to figure out each of these audiences are distinct, but then they're also interrelated. So I'll give you an example. We have a lot of dashers that are also consumers.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we think about that overlap? Yes, I'm talking to you as a dasher. And so a few years ago, we had actually built this thing where we're thinking of them so distinctly that we weren't serving consumer offers to our dashers. So then we're actually, we should just break that. And not only should we serve them consumer offers, we should serve them richer offers, because these are people that are going in and out of these stores all the time. And we can actually build it into a rewards program for the Dasher.
I'm wondering, it's so interesting. I'd not thought of it that way. And I'm wondering if you've gotten any insights from your Dasher as consumer that have influenced product.
Massively.
Yeah.
Massively. So our Dashers are so important to our business.
Yeah.
Because they are out in the real world, seeing everything as it happens. So like even really deeply operational things like around holidays. Right? Holidays are tricky because a lot of stores close and they don't tell you that they're closed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do we know that a store is closed? Turns out a Dasher can tell us that.
Yeah.
Right. So there's all of these things that you build and you start to say, okay, like this, they can actually serve a totally different set of functions and contribute a ton of value to the business beyond the delivery. And so how do we think of them in that lens? How do we think of them as consumers when they come back to the app? How do we work with partners to actually give them specific offers for going to a particular store? So then you start to bring together the Dasher, the merchant, and the consumer.
Yeah.
So there's lots that you can do. It's complex, but there's a lot of fun to be found in those intersections. And then we do a lot between merchants and consumers. We do a ton of co-marketing with our merchant partners to say, how do we help you think about your Starbucks and you're trying to achieve this particular outcome,
yep.
or your Aldi and you've launched on DoorDash and you're trying to.
And are you doing that as an ABM system, or like are you account-based management?
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, in some ways, but also working directly with those brands,
right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you two questions to bring this to an end, and one is we got way off track, but it's important enough that I want to bring it back, which is what's the difference between strategist as you practice it and have practiced it across your career and business strategy, and what's the commonality?
I would
converge, diverge.
Yeah, I would say the commonality is the framework that you and I set up at the beginning, which is the from to. That doesn't matter whether you're talking about brand strategy or whether you're talking about business strategy. Mm-hmm. The from to is the same, which is you have to know where you are today and you have to know where you're trying to get to.
Yeah. Or as the Alice in Wonderland quote says, all roads lead there.
Correct. When I worked on Bacardi many years ago, our from, and I'll try and remember this, it was like, it's a prevailing perception is that it's a manufactured pseudo-Latin made-up brand drank by douchebags who don't know better. So that was literally the from. That was the from. That's like, this is where this thing is today. And a
lot of upside from there.
A lot of upside. And the two was like, this is actually 150-year-old rum created, handcrafted by this Cuban family. But that's not just a communications exercise. There was actually a lot of things we had to go do in the product to make that so. Because at the time the brand had proliferated. We had made it 800 flavors. There was just like all of this stuff that was distracting from the core proposition. Yeah. So it wasn't just like a comms exercise. It was like, you have to revamp the portfolio. You have to change the liquid. You have to change the product. You have to do all of these things to get you from the from and to. So the commonality, I'd say, is the framework. And then the business versus marketing part is just what are the levers that you get to pull.
Right. It is that hard and that simple, isn't it? One of the first times a strategist defined her job to me was, she said it very simple. She said, my job is to interrogate brand and business. And what I think I'd add to that today is interrogate brand and business so you know the levers to pull as you go from to.
That's right.
So a last question for you that I haven't asked anybody else, but you're so very good at what you do.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. Is there anything in the art and science of this practice, this role inside of enterprise marketing that as it evolves, you're wrestling with and struggling with?
There's a lot there. I will say that the thing that I think keeps me up at night somewhat is that there's a lot of like false precision.
Yeah.
So like, look, as much as I feel really good about the impact that we drive as a marketing organization, as good as I feel about our methods for like attribution and incrementality and testing, and so we do all of this stuff to triangulate exactly what it is that we're driving, I also think there's a lot of unknowns there, right? Because like none of these systems are actually perfect, none of the measurement systems we have up here, it doesn't matter what it is, even last click, it's not perfect.
Yeah, you may recall that in Aspen at our Forbes CMO Summit, we had a panel. It's even possible you sat on it. I cannot remember anything anymore. Where I stole a Rory Sutherland quote, which is he referred to the false god of perfect measurement.
Yeah. So I think that I would say, like, in the art and science of this, like, I think this is both math and magic, and so I think you want that to be true. And I'd say the other thing is that I think we've gotten, as you become more obsessed with measurement, the function becomes more tactical.
Yes.
And less strategic.
Yes.
Because everyone's just looking for what's the thing that I can point to that something moved.
Yeah.
Versus, like, the third thing I talked about up front, which is the empathy. Like, for me, the thing that makes this job fun is understanding people.
Yeah.
The core of this job is, like, understand people, understand what they need, and then if you can deliver it, you win.
Yeah.
And if you deliver it more often than the other guy, you are going to gain share. And I think that strategic discipline and the customer connection, I think, gets lost the closer we get sort of obsessed with the perfect god of a perfect measurement.
I don't know if you'll remember this, but I think it was the first time we talked. I told you that somebody had nominated you for the entrepreneurial CMO list, and as I kind of did the beginning of due diligence, I looked you up on LinkedIn, which is where everybody goes these days, right? Quite a journalist.
Deep interrogation there, Seth. Well done.
It's my strategy background. Well, everybody else talks about being a visionary this or a transformative that. You are a human, a father, a brother, a son. And it really stuck out to me because as you've heard me say elsewhere, I think too often in these designations of consumer, customer, vendor, client, agency, we lose the humanity.
100%.
And you never lose the humanity. And I'm glad you brought up empathy at the end because you talked about it in the beginning, and I wanted to spend more time there than we got to. But if you had kind of a parting word for our audience, but the marketers and the rest of the C-suite, about the importance, the strategic business building importance of empathy, what would it be?
I honestly think it's the only thing that matters. Like, I think understanding people and actually building things, forget marketing, building things that add value or solve problems for them. Like, if you think about any great business in history, all the large businesses that we all think of, like, fundamentally, that is the thing that they have done. And I think when you lose sight of the person, when you lose sight of the human, this is, you think about short-term and long-term. A lot of the conversation is about, because people are doing things to drive a number in the short term, and it doesn't pay off over the long term. Anyone can move a number in the short term.
Yeah, they're marketing to the CFO, not
Correct.
The human.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think just don't, like, whether you're a business leader or a marketing leader, just don't lose sight of, like, that's actually why we're here.
Kofi, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you.